Happiness is beautiful, it's a kind reality. Happiness is the highest good, happiness is free. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.
Welcome to the Happiness Show. This is George Ortega. I'm here with Lionel Ketchen, and we're here to talk about happiness, because happiness is, always has been, and always will be the point of it all. Today we're going to be talking about the fact that it's not just about happiness, it's about righteous happiness. And basically this show is about the idea that many people in the world aren't really, they're kind of like skeptical about happiness. They're not sure what it's about and all. And I think what many people object to is the fact that sometimes we'll seek and achieve our happiness in ways that aren't very good, that aren't very ethical. So we're going to devote this program, this episode, to exploring the difference between righteous happiness and unrighteous happiness.
Okay, George, that's excellent. I think it's great that we're looking into a further examination of the meaning behind happiness, the good, the bad, the misconceptions of it. I think this is great. And I think when we use the word righteous, I don't know about others, but I know for myself, as you know, I called and I said, righteous. Now, what is your definition of that word? How are we using this word? What's the context, the meaning? I didn't do it. I didn't check it in the dictionary. And as many may have their own thoughts on righteous, and it's important to have a communication level of what we're talking about. I know that when I looked at it and I tried to find words like it, the thesaurus said that honesty, integrity, virtue, all beautiful, beautiful, harmonious things. And I even never associated those words with righteousness. I didn't know they went together. I didn't know they meant that. So I was wondering, what your thoughts were.
Right. Basically, there's, in my experience, I chose, I could have chosen virtuous happiness. I could have chosen other synonyms. I didn't choose virtuous happiness because virtue has to do with virile, which is kind of like a masculine trait. And, ethics is certainly not about gender.
Right.
Another reason I chose righteous as a term for this is that righteous is a very traditional religious term. And there are many people in many religions that kind of are skeptical about happiness. They and understandably, they're skeptical about happiness being derived or won in the wrong ways. So we kind of, we want to have, like, religious people in general understand that happiness not only is the highest good, but it's probably the best way to create a better world. So that's the reason I chose that. And yeah, I know there are like different connotations that have the word righteous in it. For example, like to be self-righteous is certainly not a compliment. But yeah, it's good that we clarify the point that when we say righteous happiness, it's not a pejorative term in the sense of righteousness. It's about like happiness that's derived, that's won in a way that's virtuous.
Okay. And virtuous could be synonymous with good.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's good.
And all right, to kind of like as a good, simple working definition, we can really conclude that righteous happiness is what creates greater happiness for others. Okay.
And so you're trying to make a differentiation on how some people misconstrue happiness, how they use it in a way that isn't really happiness at all. Like people say to me, "Oh, you're preaching happiness." A person who is an axe murderer or a person who kills lots of people, he's happy, they say.
Well, yeah, and yes, according to the research, that is happiness. I mean, like, the other point we want to make is that what the definition for unrighteous happiness is that it is happiness, but it diminishes the happiness of others and probably of oneself.
Okay.
Right. And sometimes, like we're subjective beings on this planet. We might conclude, for example, the American Revolution. Okay. If the English had won, if the British had won, George Washington would have gone down in history as one of the, rabble rousers, somebody who just wasn't for the king, wasn't for England, right? A troublemaker, okay? He would have been labeled a bad person, and any happiness that he had within the revolution would have been said, well, that's unethical, that's unrighteous happiness, right? He won, okay, so like now he's like a hero to us, and because of that, his happiness is perhaps righteous. So I just want to highlight the point that sometimes we can't say, whether another person's gaining their happiness in a righteous or unrighteous way. Sometimes it's very clear, but sometimes it's kind of like, hazy in a way. Okay.
Well, go ahead, because you have some points that you want to make on this, and I want to elaborate on them, but why don't you go ahead with some of the points that are important.
Okay. Again, there are people in the world that are somewhat kind of like, they don't value happiness a lot, and again, I think it's because they confuse happiness with unrighteous happiness. So let's kind of like separate unrighteous happiness into three kinds. Okay, one I think is related to hedonism. It's a kind of like a happiness that is seeking pleasure in an unwise way. Notice I didn't say seeking pleasure, in any way, because we're all pleasure seekers. But
could be unhealthy, could be detrimental to others, this kind of a thing.
Right, exactly, especially detrimental to oneself, but to others also. But it's unwise. It's not necessarily against others. Their intention isn't to hurt others or themselves, but taking drugs, drinking too much, smoking, unhealthy behaviors, unhealthy activities. So that's certainly a kind of like an unrighteous happiness. It's just not a right way to approach it. Another kind of unrighteous happiness, I think we can term selfish, indifferent happiness. And that's the happiness of, let's say, people in the world who are really only concerned with their happiness. They're not concerned with the happiness of others. They might, let's say, create a product that will give them a lot of money or give them a lot of things they want, to the detriment of many people. Like I think the cigarette industry is an example of that. They create these products that really wreak havoc on many people's lives. So that's kind of like a selfish happiness.
May I jump in with?
Sure.
No, please don't be sorry, but I'd like to change the word selfish or just substitute self-centered, because a self-centered happiness, one that is not happiness at all. That it has, in other words, doesn't want anything to do with you, doesn't even want to be involved with, doesn't care about you, your benefit isn't important. That's not happiness, but that is self-centered happiness.
All right,
but I think we're all selfish in terms of...
Well, no, because on the line, I'll know. Selfish really connotes kind of like taking care of ourselves at the expense of others. Selfishness is really,
Okay.
All right. Yeah, because really, it's about, if you're selfish, you could be self-centered and not necessarily selfish in a sense, and but all right, but that's anyway. The idea is that when our happiness is focusing on ourselves at the expense of others, then that's certainly not a righteous happiness. Right. Okay, and the last happiness, I think perhaps is even worse, is that not only is our happiness selfish, it's actually cruel. It's actually, we're not only indifferent to the fate of other people, we're deriving our happiness from the pain of other people. And that's like people who demean other people, people who go out of their way to hurt other people because in some sadistic way they enjoy
That's their satisfaction level, that's their contentment and happiness, yeah.
So again, that's the third kind of
It could even be violence, and they could even derive, well, like you said, like we started about murderers and serial killers.
Right. So again, so basically, and the idea is that, when people have their reservations about happiness, about the utility, about it being the purpose of life, these are the kinds of issues they're concerned with. They don't want a happiness that's cruel, that's selfish, that's hedonistic in an unwise way. And that's why this show is so important. Okay, now...
Well, aren't we really saying then that if happiness is goodness, and isn't that what it is? Can happiness actually be goodness, or happiness be righteous, be virtuous? I mean, just to try to understand it better. Isn't that what happiness is?
Well, yeah. I mean, like Aristotle, referred to it as the highest good.
Highest good.
Right. And we could even go a step beyond Aristotle. We could claim that righteous happiness is really the highest good. Righteous happiness is higher than just happiness, because righteous happiness is deriving our happiness in a way that helps others to become happy.
Okay. For me to understand this better, I'd like to share this with the audience, whether it clarifies what we're talking about. It does for me. It does for me. And sometimes quotes are that little pill that elaborates so much better than, you know, a half an hour of going back and forth. And this is by Bertrand Russell, who actually wrote a book called The Conquest of Happiness. He's got a lot of things about happiness, but this came out of New Hopes for a Changing World, and this was written in 1951, give you an idea how long ago. And I love this quote: "The good life, as I conceive it, is a happy life. I do not mean that if you are good, you will be happy. I mean that if you're happy, you will be good." I mean, I think and agree with Aristotle, with you know, Bertrand Russell as near as the last century, that happiness is goodness, is the highest virtue, will bring humanity and each of us to a point where we will care about the other person, because it's happiness that we share, and it's just part of all of us. And I think that's important.
That is such an important point, Lionel, because basically many of us are like moralists. Many of us are concerned that we live in a good world. Many people who are very deeply religious are like this. And it's very important for them to understand that the fastest, the best way to a better world where people behave better, more ethically, is a happier world.
Right. And, you know, I see your point on the religion aspect, because Puritanism was really against feeling good, being happy, laughing, dancing. You know, that's Puritanism. So, and maybe many religions have that undertone that, you know, hey, be religious, don't be happy. But the way I see it, religion is about happiness, you know, and every, you know, every religion really talks about it. I mean, you know, very, what I would call blatantly, very predominantly, they talk about happiness.
Yeah, well, many people don't actually know that the word blessed is derived from, I think, a Hebrew or Aramaic word that actually means happy.
Okay.
Blessed are the meek.
Right.
And
exactly.
But again, I want to accentuate that, you know, as a happiness is a means to a better world. I'm not talking about unrighteous happiness. This is about righteous happiness. You know, about happiness derived in the right way, happiness that actually creates more happiness for other people. Okay, this is kind of like a tangent in a sense, but like positive psychology is one of the instruments that's bringing the most happiness into the world right now. Before positive psychology, most psychologists were delving into the negative side of life, negative experiences. And Dr. Martin Seligman came along in 1998, kind of established this new movement that concentrates on the positive. But unfortunately, he wrote a book recently that was titled Authentic Happiness. Okay, and the reason that's somewhat unfortunate is because that term authentic is likely very confusing to many people. It might give people the understanding that, for example, some people may believe that they're happy, whether righteously or not, but their happiness isn't real. Okay, so basically, along with just clarifying the distinction between righteous and unrighteous happiness, we should make the distinction that really there is no inauthentic happiness, that anyway, that happiness is happiness. For example, if one person is feeling happy, another person cannot, in any scientifically validated empirical way or anything, basically claim that the person is not happy. That's why Ed Diener and researchers who preceded him coined the term subjective well-being, because it's about a subjective experience.
Yeah, from a scientific analysis, but basically, and I forgot how the quote went, but I remember a quote that went, if people say they're happy, then they are, then you have to take that as a fact, because people aren't generally going to say a statement like that and lie about it. I mean, it's almost, in other words, you could lie about a lot of things, but you actually can't. You almost can't lie about that.
And they don't. People don't, because what happens, they check. They'll ask their friends and their family, how happy is this person?
Exactly. But the fact that you would say you're happy and you're not, you couldn't say it if you weren't. You know, it's like professing a religion.
In general, people are very honest about, how happy or less happy they are. I think what Dr. Seligman may have meant was that there are perhaps authentic and inauthentic roads to happiness, that some people think that happiness is derived through externals like more money and prestige and fame and education and all that, where it's more of an internal experience. But anyway, it's good to clarify that really all happiness is happiness.
Well, I would, I might clarify authentic happiness more so as a happiness that's within, rather than a happiness that is searched for from the outside, where you're searching for it and you haven't got it.
Well, again, if a person, because on average, according to the research, on average, generally money will not make people happier, but for some people it makes them very happy. For some people, being successful makes them very happy. Having a lot of power or a lot of education.
Sure.
So basically, there's an external happiness that's derived from what's going on in our environment, and that's more of an internal happiness that's derived more from what we're feeling, how we're perceiving the world.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that is a differentiation we can make. Okay, so basically, again, we can make the statement that the highest form of happiness is that which creates the greatest happiness for the most people. This is kind of a takeoff of Jeremy Bentham's.
Okay, but that's Greek philosophy right there.
I think the first person who came up with a statement like that was Jeremy Bentham, which was I think the 1500s, 1600s, maybe 1600s, I think. Basically, he came up with the idea that goodness, the measure of goodness is what creates the greatest happiness for the greatest amount of people.
Oh, okay. Measure of goodness.
So what we're saying is the greatest happiness is what creates the greatest amount of happiness for other people. And Bentham's statement, I think, is a role model for what government should be. Government shouldn't be really about gross domestic product. It shouldn't be about the kinds of things they present it at. It really should be as creating policies, creating initiatives, institutions that create the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people without naturally leaving people out. Without, just because a lot of people are becoming much happier doesn't mean that certain people should not be included, of course.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think it's very important that happiness be understood on an individual basis. We're groups, we're nations, we're governments, we're businesses, we've got all kinds of families and everything. But if the individual is not the unit of happiness, then happiness will never be fulfilled, because each individual has to experience, understand, apply the benefits, and feel happiness within themselves in order for happiness to exist. It can't just exist out there. It has to exist within each one of us.
Oh yeah, because happiness, at its root, happiness is an emotion. That's really all it is. You extend it for a certain amount of hours, it becomes a mood. You extend it for days, weeks, and months, it's a state. So, but it's really at its essence an emotion, a feeling. I want to explore the concept of righteous pain.
Okay.
Because a lot of times there's pain in life, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes we will assume a certain amount of pain in order to help others become happier, to benefit people. Soldiers, doctors who might work 18 hours a day, But the point I want to make is that righteous pain that is helping others become happier doesn't necessarily have to limit the individual's happiness. In other words, it's very possible for us to be in whatever amount of pain and still be very happy. That's very important for people to understand, because a lot of life, pain seems to be an unavoidable, at least at this point in our evolution, part of life. So it's very important for people to understand that when we go through pain that's let's say not righteous, it's kind of like it's unnecessary, because we're going through pain, it's not helping anyone else get happier, so why are we doing it, But if we're choosing to go through a certain amount of pain, righteous pain, that is helping others become happier, then I think that's a very good thing.
Well, isn't most pain unavoidable when it comes to pain, though?
Yeah, but sometimes we'll choose. For example, a doctor might have chosen an easier career. He doesn't have to stay up, 18 hours a day, be on call all the time. Sometimes we make choices that will determine how much pain we feel.
Okay, all right, I see your point. In that sense, it seems like a self-sacrifice for goodness, for something good. And my other way of looking at pain, and pain the way you're putting it, maybe pain as a sacrifice, is that it's suffering that's beneficial for people. And so you're now
righteous pain.
All right, righteous pain. Now, I see your point. It's not so easy to comprehend what we're talking about. At least if it isn't for me, that I could just imagine. And one of the things I'm seeing is that if you're sharing yourself, if you're spreading happiness to others, and you're sort of, it's really like a mother who has very little food, and there's only one slice of bread left. And I mean, I'm giving you a pretty bad analogy maybe, but instead of eating it because she's hungry and her baby's hungry, she gives it to the baby and the baby eats it. And now the baby's not hungry anymore, but the mother's very, very happy, even happier than if she ate it herself.
Exactly.
Is this exactly what you're talking about?
That's a perfect example. She chooses to experience pain for the benefit of someone else. Someone else is happier.
Okay, then she has pain, she's suffering, but yet she's happy, and she's self-sacrificed. She's gone beyond herself, and in doing that, she's experienced something of happiness. And that's how wonderful happiness really is, by the way. That's why it's virtuous. And if that's what you're referring to as righteous happiness, then I'm with you.
Well, yeah, and again, we want to highlight the fact that the best way to a better world is through righteous happiness. Because, we have been trying to create a good world, a better world, through goodness, through ethics, through, religious laws, civil laws, through basic goodness for about 2 millennium at least. And the end result of that has been a 70% happiness level, a lot of crime, wars, etc. We've been fairly successful. It's been a fairly good strategy. But I think we'll find over the next decade especially, certainly over the next 2 decades, that as we adopt happiness, righteous happiness, as our purpose, as our goal, as our main purpose, that our world is going to become much better. Happier people do not commit as many crimes. Happier people are more compassionate. Happier people relate to each other better. So really what we want to say to people who are perhaps more concerned with creating a better world than creating a happier world is that righteous happiness is probably the best and fastest way to a better world that exists.
Yeah, and I would throw out 3 religious leaders as examples. Just came to me. The Dalai Lama, the Art of Happiness. I mean, there's righteous happiness in action. The Dalai Lama and Buddhism. Rabbi Zelig Pliskin and his book Gateway to Happiness is another prime example of righteous happiness for basically the book was written for Jews, but it's really for the human race, every single human being. So is Buddhism. And then in the Christian area, I think of a minister that's on TV all day Sunday, and I think he's great because he talks about happiness in every sermon, and if it's not the word happiness, it's all happiness related. He's basically a psychologist, but he's a Christian minister. His name is Joel Osteen, and I've talked about him. He's got I think the largest congregation in the country and in Texas, Lakewood Church. And these religious leaders are actually talking about righteous happiness, not religious happiness, but righteous happiness. And they devote a lot of time to it. I mean, they're not pushing. Well, they're religious leaders, but they're not pushing religion like other religious leaders. They're pushing happiness because they know that it could change the world.
Right. I think you may be familiar with this. I think he's a reverend. Robert Schuller.
Sure.
The Be Happy Attitudes.
Yeah, I've got the book, read it. I think he's great. I mean,
exactly.
Norman Vincent Peale, another one.
So, for religion in general, I think that they would be wise to understand that that trying to encourage people to become good without that connection that
Exactly.
with happiness. I mean,
Exactly.
if they're gonna, if the moralists of the world, whether they be within religion or government or different kinds of institutions, want to really help individuals become as good a people as possible, and if they want to stress goodness, virtue as their means, they should at the very least be emphasizing the fact that the reason for goodness is for one's happiness and for the happiness of those around one. That a lot of times in religion especially, we're taught to be good because it's good to be good, for goodness' sake. All right, and unfortunately, we're biological creatures that are pleasure seekers. We basically are biologically hardwired to seek pleasure, avoid pain. So when you tell people that, listen, becoming good, being good, helping people is a very good way to become happier, that will induce them to become much better people.
Yeah, and my statement would be, and I didn't make this up, I mean, I read it somewhere, and it's almost an offshoot of Bertrand Russell's statement, that not everyone who's good is happy, necessarily happy, but everyone who's happy is good. And I know that's a broad statement.
Yeah.
I know it's a broad statement, but I still believe that. I think happy people are good people. I still say that. And I don't really feel
I think
that
in general you can say that. Yeah.
Okay, and then nothing's across the board.
Right.
But yes, I'll agree.
Okay, and the last thing, we want to just present a message. There's a lot of unhappy moralists in the world, and there are a lot of unhappy hedonists. Unhappy moralists tend to miss the point. They focus on goodness. They forget or neglect the fact that goodness is about happiness. And again, if you differentiate to them the difference between righteous happiness and happiness, hopefully they will get it. They'll understand. And again, with unhappy hedonists, it's not just about seeking pleasure in any way, just haphazardly. It's about seeking it wisely. And again, righteous happiness is the way to do that.
Well, this has been an excellent show. I enjoyed it, George, and I learned quite a bit from you actually talking about this particular subject.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, that's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching. In the future, we'll explore other topics designed to help us better enjoy life. Be good, think well, feel very happy, and I hope you'll join us next time here on The Happiness Show.
Happiness is powerful. It's our underlying need. Happiness is why we live each day. Happiness is destiny. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.